to be invited back because it's been maybe 3 years since I was last talking in these sessions, and you pretty much described my full CV there, except for although I spent 7 years in industry, for the last 10 years, I've been here with the University of the Built Environment, and I'll just introduce them a little bit to say that they are the leading provider of supported online education in our industry. They have over 100 years of experience, and all our courses are accredited by relevant bodies, including several by the RICS for various APC pathways. And that takes us nicely on to this topic of this session, where I'll talk a little bit about some of the recent changes, as you said, that we saw a few months ago. But that'll be towards the end of the session. As we've got three of these, I think this will be the best time to introduce the APC process. Now, I'm an APC assessor, I'm an APC counsellor, so I will probably lean into my own experience and thoughts as we look through the requirements of the APC process. Okay. I'll start by saying how, when I went through this myself 20 years ago, it's been 20 years and 1 week since I became a chartered surveyor. There was really only one main route, and virtually all the RICS administration was set up towards that. Everything was also paper-based, no online submissions, no email. I had to print out everything, all my documents, in triplicate and send by courier. And now it's actually a lot easier to engage with support from the RICS is a lot better, more professional, and available across the globe. I'll also say in this session, though, I will be mainly talking about that main traditional route leading to the APC, the route that requires this period of 24 months of structured training. I'm not going to talk about some of the other specialist routes, such as the academic route or the senior professional route. I have assessed on these panels, and I have acted as a counsellor several times in the academic route, but we don't really have time to talk about them today. And I'm also not going to talk about becoming an associate or a fellow of the RICS. So the typical route used to be to complete an accredited degree and then follow 2 years of structured training, but the RICS now recognise different combinations of relevant work experience and academic achievement are valid. A candidate's degree can be non-accredited, but they can still attempt the APC. However, you would need more years of experience, or perhaps you have an accredited degree, but with 5 years of experience, then the structured training period would be reduced. But I'm mostly going to concentrate on this top left route today, the traditional route. And here we can see the various components that need to be completed. My memories of my time doing this was I viewed the final assessment interviews as towering over the others. It was sort of the be all and end all of the process, when in fact it's only just a sort of tip at the end that takes only an hour. The whole period of structured training obviously takes a lot more effort, and I'm not sure on reflection why I was so nervous only about the end part. Everything is important. And you can see here the list of requirements. Structured training can be 12 years or 24 months. You will keep a diary, as you will be required to submit a logbook based on your diary's work. It should be, and related to that, you will draft a summary of experience that demonstrates how you have developed. You'll need a case study. When I was going through this, it was called the critical analysis, but in essence, a little difference except the name change. You will also submit a record of continuing professional development. That is 48 hours of learning for each 12 months of structured training. So the 2 year route requires a minimum of 96 hours of CPD. And similar to when I went through this, you need to do a lot more continuing professional development before you pass the assessment than after. Once you pass, it's only 20 hours a year, so it's sort of contrary to the definition of CPD. You'll also need to complete and pass the RICS professionalism module. It's an e-learning course that covers professionalism and the RICS rules of conduct, and of course you'll need to attend that final interview, and I'll talk a bit about more about that shortly. Finally, an important component is you'll need to find a counsellor. I've mentioned already that I am a counsellor. Not a year goes by when I'm not a counsellor for some candidate. The counsellor should be a chartered surveyor, and their role is to support candidates through the process. They'll provide guidance, and they will verify the candidate's progress. Okay, that they're achieving the necessary milestones and undertaking the work that gives them the experience to the correct level. And you'll see shortly how they fit into the structured training program. You may also have a supervisor appointed. This is optional now. 20 years ago, it was mandatory, and they have a complementary role to the counsellor, albeit they didn't need to be a chartered surveyor before. I don't think they do need to be a chartered surveyor now. Normally, somebody who worked close to you day to day. Mine was my line manager. He was a chartered surveyor, and he could give me advice more regularly than my counsellor, as they knew my day to day work. Anyway, it's now going to be dependent on your circumstances. Very quick words on pathways. Um, I think maybe mentioned competencies. We'll look at competencies in a second. But competency is a convenient word that describes a certain skill or area of expertise. These are divided into three levels, each progressively showing a greater achievement of knowledge or experience. And the choice of competencies will depend on which type of surveyor or built environment discipline that you are pursuing. And to that end, you'll select a pathway. There are 22 currently. You'll see later that there's a couple more being developed. Each pathway is sector specific and offers a basket of competencies that are necessary for your discipline, as well as a list of optional ones that you can pursue that should be relevant also to your day-to-day work. Um, Obviously, candidates, for example, in the building control pathway will select competencies relevant to their job that will be different from, say, somebody on the rural pathway, although there may be some significant overlap with someone, for example, on building surveying. Building surveying and building control might share quite a lot of similar competencies. And speaking of these competencies, there are 11 mandatory competencies that are common to every pathway. A full list of these are in the requirement and competencies guide. Uh, Not enough time to go into them today. It's a very extensive document and explains which competencies you can select for your chosen pathway. Okay. Each pathway also says there's technical competencies, and there's a number of core competencies that you must achieve, and a number of optional ones too. The guide also states the level that you are required to achieve for core technical competencies. For example, you're probably required, to get three of these to level three, or four to level three, or perhaps two to level three and two to level two. And you can see here roughly the difference between the levels. Level one is knowledge. You can achieve this through a mixture of learning, reading or study, as well as experience from work, or even seminars, training events. Level two takes that a bit more and requires you to demonstrate that you can apply that knowledge. You'll be looking to show from examples in your workplace that you have applied what you've learned. And then level three, step beyond. Many of them use this phrase, reasoned advice, give reasoned advice. Assessors are looking for you to describe how you have given reasoned professional advice through examples from your work. Here on the right, I'm showing you levels one and two for measurement. Future sessions, of course, we can look into the sort of behaviours and experience that we would expect for level three. Look a bit closer at structured training now. Uh, you should be enrolled to start recording training in your diary. On the right, you can see what I've taken from the candidate's guide, the milestones, and that show how you should progress. Actually, this one shows a supervisor being appointed. Now, I said this is not necessary. I was lucky enough to have both a supervisor and counsellor who took the process seriously. Um, as you see here, there is a suggested supervisors meeting at 3 months. Well, my supervisor made sure that happened, that it was recorded, and details of actions going forward were kept. And all too often, I heard from colleagues, university colleagues working in other companies who had line managers who procrastinated or skipped these meetings or didn't take them seriously, tried to get them over and done within a few minutes. And that really misses an opportunity for real feedback and reflection. There was a sort of feeling maybe 20 years ago that often the role wasn't taken seriously, and that can be a huge demotivator for the candidate. And I can understand also that if you are an employee, perhaps a young employee, a new graduate, a new firm, you may be shy about pressing senior staff to take responsibility seriously. But ultimately, it is the candidate's responsibility to ensure that these meetings happen and actually push, insist that time is set aside to discuss progress. So a meeting every 3 months with a supervisor, if there is one, and meeting with a counsellor every 6 months, all the while you're recording your diary, the work you're doing, and which competency that work is relevant to. And this will feed into your logbook, the logbook which is actually submitted to the RICS. Um, when I started the process, I had to actually send off my diary, and it was written and signed off by my supervisor and counsellor. But now you don't need to do that. It's just that the logbook which summarises the work you've done. Also, back when I did my diary, I could record quarter days spent on activities, so there could be 4 entries of different work done in a day. And now the guide states you shouldn't record less than half-day periods. Um, I should also say that structured training doesn't have to be continuous. You can change jobs, take time off, but it has to be completed in the 5 year period before you sit your assessment. And we also see here on the right at the 12-month mark, it suggests that you begin identifying a suitable case study and agree the topic by the 16th month. And I have to say that when I did mine, I didn't have much clue as to what my submission would be about until much closer to the end date. I didn't really have the depth of work until about this point. The case study has to be based on a project that you've been involved in the 2 years, the 24 months prior to final assessment. And actually on that, you're going to have a session with a colleague of mine with top tips for passing the APC. And I'm not sure what they're going to tell you, but I can say that the advice to me when selecting a case study was to keep it simple. Boring is good. The more complex the case, the more avenues the assessment panel will have for questions. And you might not be able to anticipate them all. And I fell into the trap initially of trying to take the most complex case that I'd worked on, possibly the most high value and high profile asset that I had valued. But I was advised by my counsellor not to do that. Don't try and impress the panel, they will not be impressed. And I would just leave myself exposed to difficult questions. So anyway, at this period, at the end of this period, you submit your documents on the platform. You complete the online professionalism module and you prepare for final assessment. And nowadays, the assessment is by way of video conference call. You'll be expected to be in a quiet, private room, clear of any textbooks, cheat sheets, and you will be expected to show the panelists the room that you're located in. Literally lift up your laptop, if you're using a laptop, or your device, your camera, and show the whole room, move it around the room so they can make sure that you don't have anything beyond the basic bullet points for your presentation there. I think it's obviously more convenient and easier to manage than the previous in-person meetings. I had to travel to a different town for mine, which took a bit more planning, time, preparation, and cost. My interview was actually in the Bolton Wanderers football stadium. At that time, it was called the Reebok Stadium, and my interview took place in a hotel room overlooking the football pitch. And I felt I had an advantage. Ahead of the meeting, I researched how the stadium was built, just in case the panel brought up a question on construction. Could I identify, etc. And I looked at the implications for business rates of the stadium and the closure of the old stadium. I did some research ahead of time, and I was able to introduce that into my discussion, even if they didn't ask me about construction. Now, with a video conference interview, you'll have more time to focus on your actual competencies and experience. And that interview is itself straightforward. Quick introductions, housekeeping. Chair will make sure you're fit and ready for assessment. They'll maybe have some questions about your day, where you're located, and these are basically to help calm your nerves and get you comfortable. They will invite you to present your case study, and you'll have 10 minutes for this. They'll ask you questions in your presentations. In the case study, they will have received your submission a few weeks in advance, and they'll have another 10 minutes of this. And then they will start asking you specific questions about your competencies. Here on the slide, it says discussion on structured learning experience. And the panelists will decide in advance who asks you questions and which competencies they will ask you about. And it says here 30 minutes. In my experience, each panelist as a panelist has 12 to 15 minutes here. Sometimes one panelist will ask all the questions they've been allocated before moving to the other, and sometimes they'll switch and move between competencies as they go through. And finally, the chair will have questions, and this will also be an opportunity for you, the candidate, to revisit anything in the session that maybe you couldn't answer, where your mind drew a blank, or you said something wrong, and you can ask questions of the panel here. Actually, next week we'll be joined by an experienced APC panel chair who will be in a better place than me to answer specific questions in that part of the process. Anyway, as we approach the end, I'll tell you now that I was told what I was told about the process 20 years ago, and it's that the assessment panel are not strictly trying to test what you know, or rather that you know everything. Instead, they want to see who you have become. Okay? Have you become the sort of person worthy of membership? Okay? They want to make sure that you understand the idea of what a professional is and the behaviours and requirements of that role. If you pass, you'll be able to start your own practice and carry out the work of the surveyor. And the assessment panel will want to know that you can be trusted not to act unprofessionally or negligently in a way that would affect the reputation of the profession of the RICS. I think the term they use now is safe pair of hands, that you will be a safe pair of hands. Quick word on the assessment platform. I'm not going to dwell on this as we're pressed for time. Introduced a few years back, steadily improved over the years since then. This is the view that I see as an assessor. It shows links to my assessments, who I will have to assess, and my candidates I've blanked out at the bottom, who I'm acting for counsellor for. Now we're coming to the end. I'll talk quickly about the changes. The previous test of professional competence, TPC, was phased out in the 1990s, and it actually included a written test under exam conditions, and that was before my time. And similar to the changes that brought in this APC, recently it's been felt that the way of assessing had to evolve to keep with more modern ways of learning and working. As an example, I moved to work abroad in the mid-noughties, and at that time the RICS were expanding and moving to become a truly global institution, looking for members around the globe, while at the time there was very few foreign accredited programs, and therefore outside the traditional RICS regions. So therefore the assessment process had to change and move on from there. We've seen other changes. I said the role of the supervisor becoming optional, final assessments moving online, away from paper submission, etc. But in June this year, we saw a new candidates guide published, and I've mentioned it a few times. I've quoted from it a few times already. It has almost everything you need to know. Personally, I think the design and editing makes it a little hard to read on your computer. It's landscape rather than portrait format, and the text is often small. I have an example here. It's the text is often small and floating in the middle of the page. I assume it's there because it's easier to read on tablets or phones. I'm not sure. I find it difficult to read, or you've got large margins for making notes. Majority of the process actually hasn't changed, but the new guide does give important clarity on word count, you can see here. And the RICS reserve the right to reject your submissions if you exceed these word counts. There is a skill to being economic with word choice, and keeping straight and to the point will be essential in your careers. Also, big one at the top there, the new guide explicitly forbids the use of generative AI in your submission, although you can use such tools to check your grammar, help with word count, correct your spelling. Um, RICS will make checks. I believe it mentions Turnitin software will be used, same as what we use at the university, and anybody who's recently been in education should be familiar with it. And I mentioned also some pathways under development. Pilot program has started for the membership grade. There are two new planned pathways: a sustainability advisory pathway and the data analytics and intelligence pathway. And these were announced in the summer, reflecting how job roles and sectors have changed for built environment professionals. It says here coming soon on the slide, but actually no final decisions have been made. The pilot program begins this month for the sustainability advisory pathway with the data analytics and intelligence pilot expected to be next year. There's also a new pathway for ASOC Associate RICS grade. I think that's the end of what I wanted to say. We've covered the main components.